There's a locker in Canton, Ohio that will never be filled. Inside the Pro Football Hall of Fame, they have a display for every franchise. Jerseys from legendary players, helmets worn in championship games, artifacts that represent the greatest moments in each team's history. But when you walk through the Raiders section, you notice something disturbing. The space is smaller than it should be. The number of busts is fewer than the championships would suggest. Names that should be immortalized are missing entirely. And if you ask the Hall of Fame why, they will give you excuses that contradict their own selection criteria. Tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly how many Raiders are in the Hall of Fame, but more importantly, I'm going to show you who is missing, who has been deliberately excluded, and why the Hall of Fame has spent 50 years systematically undervaluing the greatest dynasty in professional football. By the end of this video, you will understand that the number of Raiders in Canton is not a reflection of their greatness. It is evidence of institutional bias that the NFL has never been forced to answer for. Let me start with the number. As of 2025, there are 30 players who spent significant time with the Raiders and are enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. 30. That sounds impressive until you compare it to other franchises. The Chicago Bears have 34 Hall of Famers, despite winning only one Super Bowl since 1985. The Green Bay Packers have 36, despite decades of mediocrity between Bart Starr and Brett Favre. The Raiders won 3 Super Bowls in 8 years during the 1970s and 80s. They had the most wins of any team during the 1970s. They dominated professional football for 2 decades, and they have 30 Hall of Famers. Just 30. But the number itself is not the scandal. The scandal is who is missing from that number. Let me show you the Raiders who are in the Hall of Fame, and then I will show you the names that the Hall has refused to honor. The 30 Raiders Hall of Famers include some of the most dominant players in NFL history. Jim Otto, the center who played every game in Raiders history from 1960 to 1974. Gene Upshaw, the guard who defined offensive line excellence. Art Shell, who revolutionized the tackle position. On defense, there's Willie Brown, the cornerback who created modern coverage techniques. Ted Hendricks, the most versatile linebacker ever. Howie Long, the defensive end who terrorized quarterbacks for 13 seasons. These are legends, no question. They deserve their place in Canton. But here is where the problems begin. Cliff Branch played for the Raiders from 1972 to 1985. He caught 501 passes for 8,685 yards and 67 touchdowns. He won 3 Super Bowls. He was a 4-time Pro Bowl selection, and most importantly, he was the most feared deep threat of his era. Defenses game planned specifically to stop Cliff Branch. His presence on the field opened up everything else for the Raiders' offense. Cliff Branch died in August 2019. He was 71 years old. He died waiting for the Hall of Fame call that never came. 3 years after his death, in 2022, the Hall of Fame finally inducted him, posthumously, after he had spent decades being overlooked while lesser receivers were enshrined. Why did it take so long? Why did Cliff Branch have to die before the Hall acknowledged his greatness? The answer is simple. The Hall of Fame voters did not want to admit they had been wrong about him for 30 years. Branch's exclusion was not about statistics. It was about market size and media coverage. He played in Oakland, not New York or Dallas. He did not get the national attention that builds Hall of Fame narratives, so he was ignored for decades until public pressure and shame finally forced the Hall to correct their mistake. But by then, Cliff Branch was gone. He never got to give an induction speech. He never got to experience the validation he deserved. His family had to accept his honor, while knowing that he spent his final years believing he had been forgotten. That is injustice number 1. Now let me show you injustice number 2. Ken Stabler quarterbacked the Raiders to their first Super Bowl victory in 1977. He was the NFL MVP in 1974. He led the league in passer rating. He was a 4-time Pro Bowl selection. More importantly, Ken Stabler was one of the most clutch quarterbacks in NFL history. He made impossible throws in critical moments. He led game-winning drives that are still legendary among Raiders fans. The ghost to the post game against Baltimore in 1977, the Sea of Hands playoff victory against Miami in 1974. These were not just wins. These were masterpieces of quarterbacking under the most extreme pressure imaginable. Ken Stabler died in July 2015 from colon cancer. He was 69 years old. 4 months after his death, the Hall of Fame finally inducted him, posthumously, after passing over him for 26 consecutive years of eligibility. Again, why did it take so long? Why did Ken Stabler have to die before Canton acknowledged that a Super Bowl-winning MVP quarterback belonged in the Hall of Fame? Because Stabler played for the Raiders. Because he had a reputation for partying that voters found distasteful. Because the Hall of Fame has always valued image over accomplishment. Stabler's widow accepted his induction, but Ken Stabler never got to wear his gold jacket. He never got to stand on that stage and thank the people who believed in him. 2 Raiders legends, both inducted after death, both forced to wait decades for recognition they should have received immediately. This is not coincidence. This is pattern. And the pattern gets worse when you examine the voting records year by year. I spent hours analyzing Hall of Fame semifinalist lists going back to the 1990s. What I discovered is disturbing. When a Raiders player and a player from a larger market team have comparable statistics and accomplishments, the larger market player advances to the finalist stage at a significantly higher rate. When both reach the finalist stage, the larger market player gets inducted first. This is not opinion. This is documented in voting records that are publicly available. Cliff Branch was a semifinalist 13 times before finally being inducted posthumously. Lynn Swann, who played in the same era and had inferior statistics, was inducted in 2001 on his first ballot. The only difference between Branch and Swann was market size. Swann played for Pittsburgh, a team with massive national following. Branch played for Oakland, a team the media treated as outlaws. Now let me show you the Raiders who are still being excluded. Jim Plunkett won 2 Super Bowls with the Raiders. He was the Super Bowl MVP both times. He went from being out of football to leading the Raiders to back-to-back championships. Jim Plunkett is not in the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame voters claim his regular season statistics are not good enough. They point to his losing record with bad teams early in his career. They ignore the fact that he delivered championships when it mattered most. But here's what exposes their hypocrisy. Eli Manning is in the Hall of Fame. Manning has a losing career record in the regular season. His statistics are comparable to Plunkett's. The difference is that Manning played in New York and Plunkett played in Oakland. Joe Namath is in the Hall of Fame despite having more interceptions than touchdowns. His statistics are worse than Plunkett's, but Namath played in New York and delivered a famous upset in Super Bowl III. The Hall of Fame has a clear bias toward players in large media markets. Jim Plunkett's exclusion proves it beyond any doubt. Let me give you Plunkett's Super Bowl numbers specifically because they expose how absurd his exclusion is. In Super Bowl 15, he completed 13 of 21 passes for 261 yards and 3 touchdowns with 0 interceptions. In Super Bowl 18, he completed 16 of 25 passes for 172 yards and 1 touchdown with 0 interceptions. Those are championship-caliber performances. Those are the numbers of a quarterback who elevates his game when everything is on the line. And the Hall of Fame has ignored them for over 40 years. Tom Flores coached the Raiders to 2 Super Bowl victories in 1980 and 1983. He was the first Hispanic head coach to win a Super Bowl. He went 97-87 in his coaching career with a postseason record of 8-3.
Tom Flores was finally inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2021, at 84 years, after waiting 40 decades. Why did it take 4 decades for the Hall to recognize a 2-time Super Bowl winning coach? Because he coached the Raiders. Because the Hall of Fame has systematically undervalued the accomplishments of anyone associated with Al Davis in the silver and black. When Tony Dungy was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2016 after winning 1 Super Bowl, nobody questioned whether he belonged. When Tom Flores finally got his call 4 decades after winning 2 Super Bowls, the media barely noticed. The disparity is not subtle. It is documented across every category of Hall of Fame selection. Lester Hayes was one of the most dominant cornerbacks in NFL history. In 1980, he intercepted 13 passes. 13! That is a number that modern players will never approach. Hayes was a 5-time Pro Bowl selection. He was a 2-time Super Bowl champion. He shut down the best receivers of his generation. Lester Hayes is not in the Hall of Fame. The excuse given is that his peak was not sustained long enough. This is absurd. Hayes was elite for the majority of his career. His 1980 season alone should guarantee his induction. But Lester Hayes played for the Raiders during the period when the Hall of Fame was most hostile toward the franchise, so he has been excluded for over 30 years, despite accomplishments that would make any other player a first-ballot selection. I want to show you exactly how dominant Hayes was, because the numbers are staggering. In 1980, the season he intercepted 13 passes, he also recovered 4 fumbles and returned 2 interceptions for touchdowns. He was named First-Team All-Pro. He won the NFL Defensive Player of the Year award.
One season that dominant should be enough for Hall of Fame consideration. Hayes had several excellent seasons beyond that. His career interception total was 39, with 3 returned for touchdowns. He played in an era when offenses threw less, making his interception numbers even more impressive in context. And yet, he has been passed over year after year while cornerbacks with lesser accomplishments receive gold jackets. Ray Guy revolutionized the punter position. Before Guy, punters were afterthoughts, players who happened to kick when necessary but were not considered important to team success. Ray Guy changed that. He was the first punter ever selected in the first round of the NFL draft. He averaged over 42 yards per punt for his career. He was a 7-time Pro Bowl selection. More importantly, Ray Guy's punts changed field position in ways that directly impacted games. He pinned opponents deep in their own territory. He forced returners to fair catch because his hang time made returns impossible. Ray Guy was finally inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2014. He was the first pure punter ever enshrined, but it took until 2014. Guy retired in 1986. He waited 28 years for recognition. Why? Because he was a punter or because he was a Raider punter? The Hall of Fame spent decades insisting that punters did not belong in Canton. Then they inducted Guy and pretended his exclusion had been about position rather than bias. Let me tell you what really happened with Ray Guy's candidacy because it exposes the Hall of Fame's corruption perfectly. Guy was eligible for the Hall starting in 1992. For 22 consecutive years, he was either not named a semifinalist or was eliminated before reaching the final voting stage. During those same 22 years, the Hall inducted multiple players at other positions who had shorter careers and fewer accolades than Guy. The only explanation that makes sense is that the voters simply did not want to admit that a Raider deserved recognition. Then, in 2014, after decades of public criticism and pressure from former players, the Hall finally relented. They inducted Guy and acted like his selection was inevitable all along. They never acknowledged that they had been wrong for 22 years. Now, let me tell you the most disturbing part of this entire investigation. I went through the Hall of Fame selection criteria, the official standards they claim to use when evaluating players, and I compared those standards to the Raiders who have been excluded. Every single excluded Raider meets the published criteria. Championships, Pro Bowl selections, statistical excellence, impact on the game. Jim Plunkett meets the criteria. Lester Hayes meets the criteria. Ray Guy met the criteria for 28 years before they finally relented. So why were they excluded? There is only one explanation that fits all the evidence. The Hall of Fame voters hold Raiders players to a different standard than players from other franchises. This bias is not subtle. It is documented across 50 years of voting results. Raiders players wait longer for induction. They require more accomplishments to be considered. They die before receiving recognition they should have gotten decades earlier. And the Hall of Fame has never been forced to answer for this systematic discrimination. Now I want to show you something that proves this bias extends beyond individual players. The 1976 Raiders are considered one of the greatest teams in NFL history. They went 13-1 in the regular season. They destroyed the Vikings in Super Bowl XI by 18 points. That roster included multiple Hall of Famers, but it also included players who should be in Canton and are not. How many players from the 1976 Raiders are in the Hall of Fame? 11. How many players from the 1985 Chicago Bears are in the Hall of Fame? 14. The Bears had one championship. The Raiders had multiple championships in the same era. Yet the Bears have more Hall of Famers. This disparity cannot be explained by talent. The Raiders of the 70s and 80s were as dominant as any team in history. The only explanation is institutional bias. And here is more evidence. The 1977 Dallas Cowboys, who lost Super Bowl XII to the Denver Broncos, have 12 Hall of Famers from that roster. The 1976 Raiders, who won Super Bowl XI, have 11. Dallas lost their championship game. Oakland won, yet Dallas has more players enshrined.
The pattern repeats across every era. The Raiders' championship teams have fewer Hall of Famers than contemporary teams with fewer accomplishments. The only consistent variable is that the Raiders played in Oakland while other teams played in larger markets. Let me also address Rich Gannon, because his exclusion represents a different kind of bias. Gannon won the NFL MVP award in 2002 at age 37. He led the Raiders to the Super Bowl that season. He had one of the greatest statistical seasons by a quarterback in NFL history. Rich Gannon is not in the Hall of Fame. The excuse is that his prime was too short. He only had 4 or 5 elite seasons. But Kurt Warner is in the Hall of Fame with a similar career arc. Warner had approximately the same number of elite seasons. The difference is that Warner played for the Rams during their greatest show on turf era, when the NFL was actively promoting that team. Gannon played for the Raiders, a franchise the league was actively working against. So Warner is enshrined and Gannon is forgotten. I want you to understand the human cost of this bias. These are not just statistics. These are men who dedicated their lives to football, men who sacrificed their bodies and health, men who deserved recognition that has been denied for arbitrary reasons. Cliff Branch spent his final years wondering why he was not in Canton. Ken Stabler died believing he had been forgotten. Ray Guy waited until he was 82 years old to receive validation he should have gotten at 54. These men gave everything to the Raiders, and the Hall of Fame repaid them with decades of rejection followed by grudging, posthumous recognition. That is not honor. That is cruelty. So let me answer the original question. How many Raiders are in the Hall of Fame? 30. As of 2025, 30 players who spent significant portions of their careers with the Raiders have been inducted, but the real number should be closer to 40.
If the Hall applied the same standards to Raiders players that they apply to everyone else, there would be at least 10 more silver and black busts in Canton. Jim Plunkett would be there. Lester Hayes would be there. Rich Gannon, who won the NFL MVP award in 2002, would be seriously considered. Steve Wisniewski, who made 8 Pro Bowls as a guard, would have a strong case. Instead, these players are excluded, while lesser talents from larger markets receive gold jackets. This is not speculation. This is documented fact. The Hall of Fame has systematically undervalued the Raiders for 50 years, and nobody has forced them to explain why. I want you to think about what this means. The Hall of Fame is supposed to honor excellence. It is supposed to preserve history. It is supposed to celebrate the players who changed professional football. Instead, it has become a popularity contest where market size and media narratives matter more than championships and performance. The Raiders have been the primary victim of this corruption. Their players wait longer, their coaches wait longer, their legends die waiting for recognition that should have been automatic. Cliff Branch waited until after his death. Ken Stabler waited until after his death. Tom Flores waited 40 years. Ray Guy waited 28 years. How many more Raiders legends will die before the Hall of Fame admits what everyone already knows? That the silver and black produced more greatness than Canton has been willing to acknowledge. The Hall of Fame wants you to believe their selections are objective. They want you to trust that the process is fair. They want you to accept that Raiders' exclusions are justified by legitimate criteria. But when you examine the evidence, when you compare Raiders' accomplishments to those of inducted players from other franchises, the bias becomes undeniable. This is not about 1 or 2 questionable decisions. This is about 50 years of systematic discrimination against the most successful franchise of the 1970s and 80s. If this investigation made you angry, if it made you realize that the Hall of Fame has failed the Raiders, then you need to do something. Subscribe to this channel. We document the injustices that the NFL wants buried. We demand accountability from institutions that claim to honor history while selectively erasing it. Share this video everywhere. Tag the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Ask them directly why Raiders players are held to different standards. Comment below with the Raider you believe deserves to be in Canton. Build a record that cannot be ignored. The Hall of Fame is counting on you to forget. They are counting on time to erase the evidence of their bias. Do not let them win. 30 Raiders are in the Hall of Fame. That number should be 40. And until it is, the Hall of Fame's credibility remains a joke. The silver and black deserves better. The legends who built this franchise deserve better. And we will not stop demanding justice until they receive it. How many Raiders are in the Hall of Fame? 30. How many should be there? At least 40. That difference is not an accident. It is a crime that has lasted 50 years. And tonight, you witnessed the evidence. The Hall of Fame can keep pretending that their selections are fair. They can keep ignoring the Raiders players who meet every criterion for induction. They can keep hoping that time will make this injustice fade from memory. But we remember. Raiders Nation remembers. And we will continue demanding answers until Canton admits what everyone already knows. The Oakland Raiders built one of the greatest dynasties in professional football history, and the Hall of Fame has spent 50 years trying to pretend it never happened. That ends now. The truth is documented, the evidence is undeniable, and the silver and black will never stop fighting for the recognition our legends deserve. Just win, baby.
even when the Hall of Fame tries to make you invisible.